The X-Men were some of the first superheroes responsible for making superhero movies a thing, and now they can finally take their rightful place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Interestingly enough, Disney acquiring Fox might have been the easiest part of this process because now they have to find a way to integrate these beloved characters into their already well-established universe. We'll let you know which characters we think will fit right in. Wolverine is probably the most obvious choice since he's one of the most well-known and popular X-Men characters, but he also fits right in with the direction of the MCU, specifically a standalone movie featuring Black Widow. Fans have been waiting for this movie for a while, and Natasha and Logan actually go way back in the comic books. During World War II, Wolverine and Captain America teamed up to rescue a young Natasha who was so grateful she even called Logan Little Uncle. It's expected that the Black Widow movie will be a prequel which details Natasha's life prior to her introduction to the MCU. We know it won't be exactly in line with the comic books, but it still seems like a natural place to introduce her good friend, Logan. It would also be interesting to see how this longtime friendship might have evolved over time and their different yet in some ways similar lives. Another classic and well-known X-Men character with connections to current MCU characters is Storm. Ororo Munroe is incredibly powerful in terms of superpowers, but more importantly, she's an incredibly meaningful character. She's considered one of Marvel's greatest female superheroes, and was the first major female character of African descent. Considering the success of movies like Black Panther and Captain Marvel, it seems like there's never been a better time to introduce Storm to the MCU. And in the comic books, Storm has a very special relationship with T'Challa. They get married. We know, the MCU Black Panther is hung up on Nakia right now, but hey, who knows what'll happen in Black Panther 2? This is definitely a romance we wouldn't mind seeing play out in the MCU. Storm also has a history of being a leader, not just for the X-Men, but for the Avengers as well. Of course, we're excited to welcome more of our beloved comic book heroes to the MCU, but don't worry, we haven't forgotten about the villains. Magneto has some amazing superpowers, which would definitely be in keeping with the serious threats the MCU has faced recently, but perhaps more importantly, he has a dynamic with other Marvel characters we'd really love to see play out in the MCU for quite some time. Marvel Studios struggled to make compelling villains, well, besides Loki. Eric Killmonger from Black Panther was so interesting because he wasn't entirely wrong. He and T'Challa were alike in many ways, but they went about their goals very differently. This is a dynamic we'd love to see in the comic books between Magneto and Professor X. Plus, if mutants are going to be introduced to the MCU, it makes sense that Magneto needs to come along too. We know we've seen Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver before, but now Marvel Studios can finally use the word mutants. Deadpool might have been a reluctant member of the X-Men, but they are one of the groups that we've seen him associated with in the comic books. Many fans don't like the idea of Deadpool joining the PG-13 MCU because, hey, let's face it, he's not a very family-friendly superhero. But with the success of Once Upon a Deadpool, we've seen the Merc with the Mouth can be just as entertaining with a lower rating. Plus, who wouldn't want to have a chance to see the current MCU cast interact with Wade Wilson? If that still doesn't convince you, consider this. It's entirely possible Deadpool can still appear in his own R-rated movies while making appearances in the MCU. Ryan Reynolds has asserted that he doesn't think Disney's going to mess with what works about the franchise, and when it comes to Deadpool, he seems to know a thing or two. Here at CBR, we sure do love our anti-heroes, as you've probably noticed since we've already talked about Wolverine and Deadpool, but what makes an anti-hero all the more compelling to watch is a more stereotypical hero to provide a contrast. Enter Scott Summers, better known as Cyclops. After all, just think how great it is when Tony Stark and Captain America trade quips with one another due to their different outlooks and methods. Of course, we prefer them trading quips to trading blows, but either way, it's pretty entertaining. Many fans believe Captain America isn't going to make it past Avengers Endgame, and if that's true, the MCU is definitely going to need some more staunchly moral superheroes with strong senses of justice. We think Scott Summers definitely fits this description, and we'd love to see him interact with the current MCU cast. It's hard to imagine filling the MCU with mutants and then excluding Professor Charles Xavier. Not only is he an interesting character with impressive superpowers, but he's also the founder of Xavier's School of Gifted Youngsters. He quite literally puts the X in X-Men. So the idea of not having him in the MCU is pretty ridiculous. Many superheroes are focused on taking down bad guys, then spring into action when aliens invade or people start selling illegal weapons. Not that we're saying those heroes are doing it wrong, it's just that Professor X does things a bit different. Xavier is all about maintaining the greater good and promoting a peaceful existence between mutants and humans. If mutants are going to be introduced in the MCU, they're going to need a champion like Professor X. We can't imagine the average citizen of the MCU is going to be more welcome and tolerant of mutants than they are in the comic books. Gambit is one of those awesome X-Men characters we just can't get enough of, and it's not hard to see why. He has a sketchy background that causes his fellow mutants to distrust him, he's something of a ladies' man, and he has that enchanting Cajun accent. Fans have been clamoring for more Gambit for what seems like forever, and in 2014, we were so excited for the prospect of a Gambit spin-off show. He was going to be played by actor Channing Tatum, but release wasn't set until February 2019, and as you've noticed, that time has come and gone, and now Disney has the rights to the character. Gambit is often depicted as an outsider, even among his fellow mutants, so we'd love to see him find his place within the MCU. Plus, he has a romantic connection with another mutant we can't imagine Disney will be keeping away from the big screen. Rogue is one of the most well-known members of the X-Men, and proof that having superpowers isn't always a good thing. Storm may insist that there's nothing wrong with mutants, but that's easy to say when you're able to make physical contact with others without it going terribly wrong. Speaking of powers gone wrong, in the comic books, Rogue has many run-ins with a recent addition to the MCU cast, Captain Marvel. She absorbs Carol Danvers, who becomes a distinct and at times dominating personality in her head. This was mentally difficult, but left her with some awesome superpowers including super strength, stamina, and durability. Rogue also got to enjoy the benefits of human Kree physiology, which made her nearly invulnerable, but frankly, Rogue doesn't even need a connection to another superhero to be an awesome addition to the MCU lineup. She's gone from villain to hero and managed to gain control of her considerable powers all on her own. Everyone knows Marvel Studios enjoys few things better than killing off our favorite characters, watching everyone freak out, and then casually bringing them back like nothing ever happened. With this in mind, it seems unfathomable that they'd keep Jean Grey out of the MCU. Not only is she one of the best-known X-Men characters of all time, but she's also one of the most frequently resurrected. Jean Grey has some powerful telekinetic powers, and when she's not using her mind for fighting, she's a genuinely caring person. Unfortunately, she's also a physical manifestation of the Phoenix Force, which sometimes puts her at odds with her fellow mutants and pretty much all life on Earth. She's also closely connected with many other mutants. Jean Grey is married to Scott Summers, sees Professor X as a father figure, and is especially close with Wolverine and Storm, not to mention her several children, one of whom we've already seen in the MCU. In the MCU, we have no shortage of super strong superheroes capable of amazing feats of physical strength, but that doesn't mean we're overlooking the importance of characters who are as smart as they are strong. Sure, sometimes their best-intentioned experiments go terribly wrong, but occasionally, they do have some good ideas. In addition to the brilliant minds of Shuri, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Hank Pym, we'd also love to see Hank McCoy in the MCU. Better known as Beast, his appearance might be a little bit off-putting, but in the comic books, he's been a member of the Avengers before. Not only does he fight bad guys, but he also fights against mutant discrimination and seeks to make the world a better place with his words as well as his fists. If mutants are going to be joining the MCU, there's no doubt they'll need a champion like Hank McCoy. Although we've seen Juggernaut on the big screen before, we haven't yet had the opportunity to see him in the MCU. Familial relationships can be complicated at the best of times, but suffice to say, stepbrothers Professor X and Juggernaut rarely see eye to eye. Juggernaut's iconic giant helmet is a result of his attempts to keep Charles Xavier from rooting around in his brain. He's a villain who finds companionship among those who have it out for the X-Men. His most recent big screen appearance was in Deadpool 2, where the heroes managed to take him out in a rather embarrassing manner, but at the end of the film, it turns out Juggernaut was down, but not out, as we saw him escape from the electrified fountain. Is it possible that he could pursue his stepbrother Professor X or his adversary Deadpool right into the MCU? And speaking of epic villains we'd love to see in the MCU, we have Mr. Sinister, one of the best known and highly regarded Marvel villains. Not only is he an entertaining character, but he has one of those wonderfully wild and convoluted backstories us comic book fans can't get enough of. Mr. Sinister's real, non-rhyming name is Nathaniel Essex, and he was once a scientist obsessed with uncovering truths about evolution. Now, we're not sure what step of the scientific method it is to make a pact with an ancient mutant, but he pretty much skipped ahead to that part. Apocalypse agreed to make him a nearly immortal being, and Mr. Sinister went on to repay this kindness by creating Cable in an effort to destroy him. We know it sounds crazy, but it may be just crazy enough to work in the MCU, where we've recently been introduced to things like the quantum realm and time travel. The X-Men are one of the most well-known superhero teams thanks in no small part to their comic book popularity and commercial success on the big screen. But although the X-Force didn't quite get off to the same fantastic start, we still have hope they could become notable members of the MCU. During Deadpool 2, we saw Deadpool assembling the X-Force in order to take down Cable, but that didn't go over too well. Fans were told to expect an R-rating X-Force movie, but that ended up being put on hold because of Disney acquiring Fox. The X-Force is similar to the X-Men in that they're a group of mutant superheroes, but they tend to be more aggressive in their approach to situations. The original lineup was Boom Boom, Cable, Cannonball, Domino, Feral, Shatterstar, and Warpath. But there have been many other great characters over the years. We'd definitely like to see some of the later members, including characters like Psylocke and Phantom X. We mentioned earlier that we greatly enjoy the dynamic between the characters Magneto and Professor X. Unlike many villains who are only interested in their own personal gain, Magneto is trying to do the right thing for his fellow mutants, which is exactly what governs the actions of Professor X. If you have trouble choosing which one of these to root for, you might be glad to know you can always choose Team Onslaught. This character was created by fusing the consciousnesses of Magneto and Professor X. Onslaught combines the darkest aspects of both characters, which should give you some insight into his cheerful disposition. As if that wasn't enough, introducing Onslaught to the MCU would also raise the possibility of us encountering Red Onslaught. This character was created when a clone of Red Skull fused part of Professor X's brain to his own, which is definitely how brains work. We know how much the Russo brothers love Red Skull, so maybe this is just crazy enough to work. Yes, there's more than one Marvel character known as Gladiator, and we're not talking about Melvin Potter, the enemy of Daredevil. We know many fans like to pretend that the television series don't exist, but he's technically already a member of the MCU. We're talking about Clark, an alien who starts out as an enemy of the X-Men due to the Phoenix. However, later on, Clark joins them as an ally. In the interest of battling insidious enemies from outer space, Clark also allies himself with other well-known Marvel characters, including the Fantastic Four, Thor, Spider-Man, and Captain America. Unlike many other X-Men, Gladiator is relatively obscure, which would give Marvel Studios more freedom when it comes to establishing him and then introducing him to the MCU. It's taken some time to get there, but it seems as though the future of the MCU is going to involve many extraterrestrial people, places, and things. If this is the case, we'd love to see the Shiar Empire introduced into the MCU. Physically, the Shiar look similar to humans, but with feathers on their heads and arms. Some aliens are only interested in conquering other planets, but the Shiar are unique because they're interested in absorbing new cultures. Of course, they're really only interested in less than peaceful ones, like duels to the death, but still. Writer Ed Brubaker has compared the Shiar to another well-known extraterrestrial species, the Romulans from Star Trek. He claims the Shiar are smart, aggressive, and mean. Although they have access to advanced technology, they aren't much for the arts, to say the least. It would definitely be interesting to see the Shiar interact with other species in the MCU, including us humans. Everyone knows mutants are basically human beings with exceptional superpowers, but Apocalypse is next level. He was born thousands of years ago as the very first mutant to ever exist. As if that, his crazy powers, and his immortality wasn't enough, he's also merged with celestial technology to become even more mighty. Apocalypse used his powers coupled with his unusual appearance to convince ancient civilizations he was a god and then encourage them to wage war amongst each other. Although he claims this was for their own good, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one. Needless to say, thousands of years on Earth hasn't improved his disposition or sense of righteousness. As you've probably guessed, opposing Apocalypse is far from easy and could necessitate existing MCU heroes teaming up with some of our favorite mutants. After all, if there's one thing we've learned from the Avengers, it's that nothing brings new friends together like a new enemy. Another epic Marvel villain we'd love to see in the MCU is Amal Farouk, aka the Shadow King. Professor X may have legions of loyal X-Men, but he also has a ton of powerful enemies, and the Shadow King is definitely one of them. While Professor X believes mutant powers should be used for good, the Shadow King, yeah, let's just say he's not entirely on board with that. In fact, their early interactions are what inspired Professor X to form the X-Men in the first place. Needless to say, this puts the Shadow King at odds with many of our favorite X-Men. The Shadow King is also part of Storm's backstory when she was a young girl trying to pickpocket Xavier in Egypt. Although he was once considered a human mutant with telepathic abilities, it was later established that the Shadow King is actually a reincarnation of a powerful and ancient entity. When we say Mojo is a spineless villain, we mean that quite literally. His alien race was completely immobilized until technology gave them the ability to walk and move. Not only is Mojo an interesting and horrific character, but he brings along the entire Mojoverse, a world so horrible we just can't look away. He's a slave owner, which is a lucrative venture in the world where citizens are addicted to watching the gladiatorial bouts he puts on. Think of him as a less charismatic Grandmaster from Thor Ragnarok. If Mojo seems a bit over the top, that's because he's supposed to be. He was created to be a parody of network executives, which is as relevant today as it was back in 1985 when the character was created. We definitely enjoy seeing many of our favorite MCU characters enter the Mojoverse. Hope Summers is a mutant that you might have seen on the big screen before without realizing it. In Deadpool 2, Cable travels through time in an attempt to save the lives of his wife and daughter. Although we don't see much of his daughter, at some point, Cable reveals her name is Hope. She's an Omega level mutant, which means that she's one of the most powerful beings around. She has the ability to mimic other mutant abilities, and is immune from feeling the effects of many abilities, including those from Rogue. When Hope was born, some believed her to be a messiah who would save both humans and mutants, but others believed her birth was an ill omen, and she'd grow up to cause nearly unfathomable destruction and pain. Raising a kid who might be either a messiah or a monster is part of being a parent, and it's one Cable took on when he adopted a young Hope. Those are just some of the X-Men characters we'd love to see in the MCU. Which characters would you like to see join the current cast of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Tell us your picks in the comments section, and then click on the subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Thanks for watching.